was selling well, and it was definitely part of what kept me alive. Hopefully this will be helpful, and that's something I can do, at least in principle, even though I'm sick and in pain.
He holds 26 world records for achievements that for most people seem possible and dangerous.
The cold is my teacher. To me, it's like God.
He might well be one of the most unique humans currently alive.
Wim Hof is changing scientists' understanding of how the body works.
I created a method. The components are breathing, mindset, and cold.
Wim Hof, the Iceman.
Hi guys, I'm Wim Hof, and every time I go into the unknown through my podcasts, exploring life into the depth, breaking the ice to go where nobody has gone before.
You're listening to the Wim Hof podcast, a Monk Studios original.
And on my side, my son Enam. He's here to keep me on track, which he's not able to do, by the way, but he will try it, and together we got a great chemistry. And we got Anne, our producer. She makes things really work.
Welcome back. In the previous episode, Wim Hof and Dr. Jordan B. Peterson talk about fighting depression, dealing with chronic pain, and how to use the Wim Hof method for Dr. Peterson's medical condition. On this episode, they continue their conversation, and Jordan Peterson shares how writing his new book saved his life.
Well, look, when people go to horror movies, they go to movies that upset them emotionally. They go to movies that are sad, and they go to movies that are horrifying. So people are so prone to expose themselves to stressors voluntarily that they will pay for the privilege of doing so, even if the emotion elicited is negative, because it's a real mystery. It's like, why the hell would you go watch the Blair Witch Project and be scared out of your skull for 90 minutes? Like, why would you pay for that? And that's a more pure fear eliciting movie. Or you can go to a slasher movie, let's say, and what you're basically exposed to are disgust eliciting stimuli. And that's not pleasant. Same if you watch a tragedy. Well, people, we have knowledge of this built into us in some sense, because we're so wired to expose ourselves to stress in a manageable manner that we will pay for the privilege of doing so, and we find it entertaining. And so there's no reason to assume from a rational perspective or scientific perspective or clinical perspective that anything that you're claiming is outlandish. It's also extremely interesting to me. So you're using, depression, unlike anxiety, depression is a pain-like phenomenon. So you would group it with frustration, technically, frustration, disappointment, grief, pain, depression. Those are all manifestations of the same thing. So you could imagine your nervous system as a tree, and most of it, of course, the central nervous system is encased in the skull, but it distributes itself throughout your entire body. And different parts of that system can be managed. That one mode of activation of that system is pain. Different parts of it can be activated. And so you can have more pure emotional pain, and that would be something more like grief or depression. But people who are grieving or depressed are much more likely to report physical pain as well, or to have a chronic pain syndrome. So you're using exposure to cold as a forum where you can experiment with mastery. That's what it sounds like to me. And
it is.
Well, it's very interesting because it's definitely the case with when the behaviorists first developed the idea of exposure therapy for fear, for anxiety, they assumed that you had learned to be afraid of something, and that what you needed to do was to expose yourself to that and then to relax and learn how not to be afraid. And so it was conditioning. That's how you acquired the fear to begin with. And then it was counter conditioning. You learned a relaxation response instead of the fear. But it was found relatively rapidly that you didn't need the counter conditioning. You just needed the voluntary exposure to fear. And then it was found that you probably didn't learn the fear to begin with. Fear is a default state, and what you learn is security. So the whole theory was not accurate, but the exposure worked. But what was really interesting, too, is when the behaviorists first started to experiment with exposure as a therapy, the psychoanalysts said, well, you'll get symptom substitution. So imagine, I'll give you an example. I had a client who was afraid of elevators. And she was afraid of lots of things, but she wouldn't get on an elevator. So we started with the elevator. And when I took her out to the elevator, she was about 15 feet away, and the doors opened, and she said, "That's a tomb." And I thought, oh, I see. So this fear of elevators is it's specific because you won't get in an elevator. But what's underlying that is a more profound fear of mortality and of death. And the psychoanalysts assumed that, you'd have these topical fears, but they were associated with something deeper. And so that if you just treated the topical fear, the deeper fear would just manifest itself some other way, which is a perfectly reasonable theory. But what happened was the behaviorists demonstrated that when you exposed people to the elevator, let's say, they also got less afraid of all sorts of other things. And so that was a mystery. It's like, well, why would confronting an elevator make you less afraid of your husband, let's say? So, and maybe more likely to bring things up with him, because that was something that was also observed. And the answer was, well, you weren't becoming less afraid, you were becoming more courageous. And that generalized. So you found, that you could go into the elevator even though you thought you couldn't. There was more to you than you had suspected. And that was practically learned as a consequence of mastering that difficult task, because the first theory would be, well, I'm terrified of the elevator, and so I can't go near it. But then you learn that, oh, you can go near it, and you learn how to cope with it, and soon you're taking the elevator everywhere, and then you're taking taxis. So then you think, there's more to me than I thought. And so then you get less afraid of everything. And that is what happened. That's well documented in the broad theoretical literature and also in the specific clinical literature.
Yes, sir. And that step she took is actually the first step to enter in the deeper parts of her own brain, making her not only courageous, but also giving her the ability to enter past that debilitating neurological pathway she has been in, that conditioning, and she could not get out. And then she found out, I can not only go into elevators, but I can take on stress because I'm the boss in my own brain. We have never learned, and this is what we should teach our kids in school, in primary school. What is the ability to enter in your own brain past your conditioning? And I hold it a moment. Professor Music, with whom I did research in the brain scans, he said in a new book of Scott Carney, he is an investigative journalist, and he interviewed him, that Wim Hof has found the secret of placebo. So suggestive power, the sugar pill, is no longer needed. We are able to enter in our brain consciously into that what is able to activate an adequate answer to whatever the stressful impact is. Could be emotion, mentally, viral, bacterial. It's all physical. And that is a new dimension in we could learn in psychiatry, that we are able to enter. I mean, if we are able to go into the periaqueductal, which is from the prefrontal cortex into the periaqueductal, the deepest part of the brain, the most primitive, then where else can we not go? And this
when I was at McGill, I studied with this man named Ronald Melzack, and he was one of the world's leading authorities on pain at that point. And he had this theory that was a gate control theory in some sense, that pain messages coming up from the body could be gated, and that those gates could open and close. And so I'm thinking about that in relationship to what you're saying and the relationship between the prefrontal cortex, the higher order cortex, where that'd be the seat of abstract thought and to some degree the seat of self-consciousness. And it's certainly activated when you're exploring. So imagine, and the periaqueductal gray looks like it's crucial for the production and perhaps production of pain. So if you're in pain and I give you a lobotomy, this was done decades ago for pain control, I cut the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the periaqueductal gray, let's say. You still feel the pain, but it doesn't matter anymore. The emotional significance of the pain is gone, and so you feel much better as a consequence. Now, I'm not recommending lobotomies for pain, although modified leucotomies are still sometimes used for intractable pain. Now, imagine that maybe you're in pain, so you have your hands in the cold, or you're in a cold shower, or you're in a lake. And instead of running away from the pain and distracting yourself, you start to focus and pay really close attention to all the sensations that you're feeling, even though they're aversive. Like you're paying extremely close attention. So I wonder if that is what's producing the connection between the prefrontal cortex and the periaqueductal grays. The prefrontal cortex is opening the gates and exploring all the sensations.
Yes.
And learning that it can do that, and learning that perhaps in principle also to master it. So maybe when I'm in the shower and I do the 30-second cold exposure, I should do everything I can to concentrate. It's weird because I can feel myself fleeing from it in the shower. You know, it's like, God, when this is going to be over? I don't want to feel the sensation of the ice water on the front of my body. I don't want to move it onto my back. It's like, but I guess what I should be doing is turning around and facing the dragon in as much detail as possible. I didn't know that was possible with pain. I know it's possible with anxiety. That's clear. The literature's clear on that.
So
but
pain, yes. Pain, very primordial, and anxiety, these breathing exercises, they help very good against anxiety. Anxiety makes you shallow in your breathing, and
right.
If you go into deeper breathing, you just break the cycle, and you get sense back, and you begin to...
Yes, and that's classically used in behavior therapy as well. You get people to learn how to deep breathe, and that does often stop the development of a panic attack, which is like a positive feedback loop.
If you have any question, I'm here. And besides of this podcast, I want to, if you please, let me talk to you more, like by WhatsApp or whatever, because I got thousands of hints for thousands of little problems after 44 years of field experience. I got it all done, and I cannot reproduce that here in the podcast. But
right. Well, let me experiment with it some more, given what you told me today, and maybe we should have another public discussion too, and investigate it a little bit further. You know, but I will try the hand and feet technique, but I'm also going to try concentrating more attentively on the sensations but I would like to do the breathing with you again during this podcast, just to make sure that I'm doing it right. And to answer your question, no, I don't enjoy it. I can't say that I enjoy it. No. I'm not at the point yet where I'm getting bursts of energy or anything like that. I'm still way too afflicted for that to be happening. So it's better than it was by a lot, but no, I'm nowhere near that yet. I'm still mostly consumed by pain.
Last thing about the pain, whenever you feel pain, this is what I do with people. I do hormetic stressful exercise. That means self-inflicted deep stress, just for, say, 5 minutes. Make people doing a plank for 5 minutes or scissor kicks for 5 minutes, and then stay in control. It's not about endurance or toughness. It's about learning how to connect with mechanisms by thought to control pain and to make it in the moment different by being conscious at that moment there, and not panic and go, no, So relax, go to it, face it.